And then this is the brainstem portion of the course. Hopefully this will go pretty well. We'll have to wait and see. What I'd like to do is talk about what you'd expect to see in the brainstem. Again, this is my standard frontal section. Here's my thalamus, right? Midbrain, pons, medulla. It's my cerebellum. Okay. Now, if I showed you cross sections of the midbrain, we're going to look at them in a minute. I'm going to take a cross section of the rostral midbrain. Okay. I'm also going to show you a cross section of the caudal pons. And finally, we're going to look at another cross section. It's going to be the rostral medulla. Having just gone through all of this stuff, if I showed you any of these cross sections, what kind of things would you expect to find in the cross sections? Cranial nerve what? Cranial nerve nuclei. Yes, number one. Ding, ding, ding. So this is going to be your cranial nerve nuclei. Perfect. Okay, so if I looked at cross sections through the midbrain, I might see, we'll talk about that in a minute. I'm just going to see the different cranial nerve nuclei. All the ones we just talked about. Now, what else would I expect to find? Whatever we've covered in this course so far, what do you know that goes through the brainstem? Give me something you know that goes through the brainstem.
Tracks.
Tracks. Give me what kind of track? Name a track.
STT.
STT. Okay, let's talk about afferent tracks. We have talked about some different afferent tracks, right? Okay. Popular one is STT. There was one more that we talked about that was an afferent tract. DCML. Medial lemniscus. Excellent. But extra credit for that one. So this is going to be DCML. And this is your medial lemniscus. Right? Because we know that DCML decussates here and then it's going to travel up as that medial lemniscus. Excellent. Now, what else would I expect to see? Blood supply is, if I do a cross section, we're not going to see those vessels. Those vessels are more on the outside. They're there. We're going to connect to the blood supply here in a couple weeks. But efferent tracts. Yes. Efferent tracts. Great. Name an efferent tract. Corticospinal tracts, right. So your CST, perfect. There's one more that I covered today. See? Corticobulbar, great. Yeah, C-O-R-T-I-C-O, bulbar, B-U-L-B-A-R. So your corticospinal tracts and your corticobulbar tract. Doing good. What else am I going to expect?
Upper motor neurons?
Those are going to be your corticospinal and corticobulbar tract. Good. What else did we talk about? What's one of my favorite landmarks in the midbrain? Cerebral aqueduct. Right. Ventricular pieces and parts. Right. So that's parts of the ventricular system. Okay. You know, specifically, if I'm looking in the midbrain, you just told me that the cerebral aqueduct should be there. Okay. Now, if I'm looking in the pons, what part of the ventricular system would I expect to see? Fourth ventricle. Awesome. That's my fourth ventricle. Okay. So those are a lot of what I'd expect to see, and then there's one more thing that might not be as obvious, and I like to point these out because I'm thinking about patient presentations. Okay, I pointed it out in the group cases when we did the cerebellar portion of the course, or the cerebellar group cases, motor control cases, and these are going to be those connectors between between specifically the pons and the cerebellum. Peduncles, right? So that's going to be my cerebellar connectors, or I can just put, so those are my cerebellar connectors, and I'm going to say inferior, middle, and superior. And those are my cerebellar peduncles. Makes sense? Not so hard, right? That's why now you see why the beginning part of the course kind of carries over into this section. Gotta remember those tracks, and we've now covered the nuclei. Talked about those. A few other things. Talked about the cerebellar pieces or connectors and that ventricular system. It all comes back. Haunting. Okay. Now, specifically, if I'm thinking about nuclei, so cranial nerve nuclei, if I took a cross section here at the superior portion of the midbrain, at the level of the superior colliculus, which cranial nerve nucleus would I see? What's in the third? What's in the midbrain is 3 and 4. What's at the higher of the two? Oculomotor nucleus. Right. So I might expect my oculomotor nucleus here. I'll just label that in. Okay, and you know, when I look into the cross sections through this caudal pons and rostral medulla, there's that huge sensory blue nucleus that I keep drawing. Yeah, main sensory and spinal nucleus of trigeminal. Great. So if I'm going to draw that in here, I'm probably going to expect to see that because that's a big one, right? It covers a lot of territory. So that's the main sensory or spinal nucleus of trigeminal. And you know, specifically I'm looking at the spinal nucleus because that's that big projection spike that comes down through those pieces, right? Does everybody see that? We got it? Now, I'm thinking about the medulla. There's a great big old nucleus here that innervates tongue muscles, and it kind of, it's a motor nucleus here. Does everybody remember the name of that nucleus? That's your hypoglossal nucleus, right? So I might expect to see a piece of the hypoglossal nucleus if I look in that rostral portion of the medulla. I'm going to switch a little bit to the other side. Now, tell me, so we talked about afferent tracts, and you said STT, so I definitely expect to see my STT in there, right? So that's coming down. So I'm going to start on this side with STT, first order neuron. Well, there you go. Thank you. There's my STT. That's, yeah, great. Whatever color you want. Yeah, it's just regular old STT. It's going to come in and synapse and decustate immediately. Go all the way up through here, travel as the STT, synapse in the thalamus with its third order neuron. That third order neuron then, where's my purple? That third order neuron then comes out, sends out axons that synapse with the somatosensory cortex, postcentral gyrus. So that's your STT. So you definitely expect to see STT in all three of these sections, right? I'm going to expect to see it in my midbrain. I'm going to see it in my pons as well as my medulla because it travels all the way up through all three of those, right? And how about my DCML? I mean, DCML is going to be kind of the same. Okay, with DCML, I'm going to put it over on this side. All right, that information is going to come in Okay, and then it's going to it's going to travel straight up, decusate at the level of the caudal medulla. Second order neuron is going to send out axons that travel all the way up to the postcentral gyrus, and that's your standard DCML. But you also told me that when I travel through here after I've decusated, this is what I'm gonna see is really my medial lemniscus, right? Put that in dark. So when I do these cross sections, all three of them should have the medial lemniscus. Right? That makes sense? So I'd expect to see those in all three sections. And then what I'm thinking about my corticospinal tract. Corticospinal tract, well, actually, the needle is going to synapse in the thalamus, right, and then come all the way up. But the corticospinal tract is going to be here, send out axons, come all the way down. It's going to decusate at the level of the caudal medulla, and this is going to be my corticospinal tract. We also had that new one that we talked about today is my corticobulbar tract. Not a whole heck of a lot of difference. As far as the corticobulbar tract, we use the fifth cranial nerve, and we talked about that motor nucleus being right here. So if I have corticobulbar tract, this is traveling down to the level of the nucleus, and it's going to synapse here, and that lower motor neuron is coming back out. That's going to be my corticobulbar tract.
Dr. Marlowe, can you repeat that whole one more time? Did you just draw a nucleus there?
So yeah, this is going to be my motor nucleus, right? And you can pick any motor nucleus. I'm just using trigeminal as an example. Okay, this is going to be my motor nucleus of trigeminal, because that's the one we use as an example. Okay, for that corticobulbar tract, this is going to be the corticobulbar tract. So you have an upper motor neuron here, precentral gyrus, travels down, decusates the opposite side, and that's going to be present bilaterally. But the point is, you're going to expect to see the corticobulbar tract only in one place. Right, because I'm only going to travel down to the level of the nucleus. Where am I going to see my corticobulbar tract? Go ahead.
Bring it down a little bit.
Yeah. Which cross section is going to have my corticobulbar tracts in there? Yeah, midbrain. Right? That's where you're going to see it. And those are all the things we just talked about that you'd expect to find. It's all good. Questions about what we're going to see when we look at these cross sections? Go ahead.
I thought that UCML.
It goes through the thalamus. Yeah, I said that. Sorry.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. When I drew it, I was just drawing it all the way up. But yes, it's going to synapse here in the thalamus. You are correct. I can make that correction. Apologies for the. Yeah. And that's going to come out there. Okay. If that helps. That probably doesn't help, right? Yeah, it goes through the thalamus, but that, for the purpose of this, I'm just trying to show you what's in the brainstem proper. Okay, but yes, it would go through the thalamus, just like the SCT, no changes. But when we look in the cross sections of the midbrain, the pons, and the medulla, I'm going to expect to see all of these things. Okay, that's the whole point. Any other questions? All right, those are the contents. Now let's move on to medulla, nuclei, and tracts. And that's going to be, so what you're looking at is going to be right here. Okay. Okay, so if I do this cross section, what I've done is I've taken a cross section right through the medulla, right here, okay, and then I put it in front of you. Okay, does everybody see where we are? And the other thing I can tell you is that this is ventral, and this is dorsal. Okay, we know that all cranial nerves, except for cranial nerve number 4, exit the brainstem ventrally. It's an easy way to tell. And this is a cross section through the medulla. And what was the name of that nucleus that I expect to see in the medulla? It's going to be here. Here's going to be your cranial nerve nucleus right here. And here's the cranial nerve coming out of the nucleus in this cross section of the medulla. Does anybody remember what nucleus and cranial nerve that is?
Hypoglossal.
Hypoglossal, right. So this is going to be my hypoglossal nucleus. Okay, and this is going to be my cranial nerve 12. Everybody see where we are? All I did is just take a cross section through the medulla. You just told me everything's going to be in there, so now we're just looking for it. Got it? Okay, so the big one, most ventrally here, I'll make it in red. This is going to be that main efferent tract present bilaterally. What's the main efferent tract for motor function? Corticospinal. Right? It's going to be your corticospinal tract. Try and keep my colors. Okay. One thing that we haven't talked about is the word lemniscus. Lemniscus by itself means an elongated structure. Okay, and you know that the medial lemniscus is going to be medial, right? So this guy right here, this long elongated structure, just the bottom part, is going to be your medial, because it's present medial lemniscus. And that carries your DCML information. Medial lemniscus. Another afferent tract that we talked about is going to be present here more laterally, and that's going to be your spinothalamic tract. I'm looking at a cross section. We're also going to see the nucleus that's used by both cranial nerve number 9 and cranial nerve number 10 for motor function. Anybody remember the name of the nucleus? Yeah, this is nucleus ambiguous right here in the medulla. Okay, these are present bilaterally. I'm just going to label one, but the color is the same on both. That's going to be your nucleus ambiguous. Okay, and then going to be this. There's a present bilaterally. There's this kidney bean shaped structure. This is going to represent your spinal nucleus of trigeminal. Right? main sensory, and the spinal is that big projection that comes down. So that's your spinal nucleus of trigeminal. And present most dorsally. This is going to be the a portion of the lowermost connector to the cerebellum. Anybody remember the name of the lowermost portion of the connector to the cerebellum? What's the lowest one? Inferior cerebellar peduncle, right. It's going to be your so the pink here, present most dorsally, that's your inferior cerebellar peduncle, or one of the connectors from the brainstem to the cerebellum. This is somebody that we talked about when we talked about cerebellum as well. This is going to be a nucleus that's important for motor learning. Does anybody remember when we talked about the cerebellum? Which nucleus is it going to be important for motor learning? No, that's going to be complex motor planning. Inferior olivary. Remember, so here's your pyramid. The next bump over, that's your olive. Okay, so that hypoglossal nucleus exits the pre-olivary sulcus, which is this little bump here. So this guy is going to be your inferior olivary nucleus. Remember, he's the guy that sends out climbing fibers that attach to both the cerebellar nuclei as well as the Purkinje cells. Okay, those are all the ones that we've talked about so far. There's just two that you haven't been introduced to yet that we will get to. And one is going to be associated in this drawing with the medial lemniscus. It's at the very tip of the medial lemniscus, and it also has medial in its name. It's known as the medial longitudinal fasciculus, and we'll talk about that when we get to the vestibular portion of the course. This is your medial longitudinal fasciculus. Again, fasciculus, one of those words that means white matter axons, right? White matter, myelinated axons. It's abbreviated MLF, medial longitudinal fasciculus. And there's one more that we'll get to a little bit later on. It usually travels around close to the spinothalamic tract. It's represented by this small black dot here. This small black dot you can see bilaterally right here above the STT. That's something known as your sympathetic tract. Okay, your sympathetic tract. And again, we'll talk more about the sympathetic tract later in the course. I think when we get to the brainstem vascular syndromes, we'll talk specifically about that. And those are all your medulla, nuclei, and tracts. No surprises? Questions? Pretty easy, straightforward. Just a matter of learning what they look like. Okay, let's go ahead and move on to the caudal pons nuclei and tracts. We can start with this big hole in the middle of the pons. What do you think that big hole in the middle of the pons represents? Sorry? Fourth ventricle. Perfect. This is going to be your fourth ventricle. talked about a couple of cranial nerves that were in the pons. There's going to be 4 in the pons. So cranial nerve number 5 is going to be up higher, so you're not going to see the motor nucleus here. But then you come down more caudal pons, and the one that's most medial is going to be here. Does anybody remember the one that's most medial? Which cranial nerve is the most medial in the pons? Abducens. Okay, so this is going to be your abducens nucleus. Okay, and this is going to be exiting here most medially is cranial nerve number 6. Okay, and just a little bit lateral to cranial nerve number 6. There's going to be this nucleus here. And this nucleus sends out axons that actually wrap around cranial nerve number 6 bilaterally. Okay, and that exits a little bit more laterally than cranial nerve number 6. Which one's that? That's facial, right? It's going to be your facial nucleus. Which makes this coming out bilaterally. It's cranial nerve number 7. Facial nerve. Okay, moving on into, use this color. There's a structure that I talked about that's medial as well as an elongated shape. Which one's that? Medial with an elongated shape. It's going to be these guys here. Yep, that's going to be your medial lemniscus. Okay, we're at a point where I'll take your input at this point. Do you want a 10-minute break now, or do you want to get out even earlier? So we'll just push through, we'll do the caudal pons and do the midbrain, and then we're done? Is that what you want to do? So no break? Works for me. Okay, now thinking about something that's, I didn't label this again. So this is going to be ventral, right? That's where your cranial nerves exit. And this is going to be dorsal. Okay. Very most ventral, really easy to recognize here, very ventrally. It's going to be red. Does anybody remember what this would be? Corticospinal tract. Perfect. It's going to be your CST. Okay, we also talked about, so STT. I think I just did a darker blue. So your STT is going to be present here, bilaterally. We also talked about that sensory nucleus. It's involved in receiving information from the face. You remember that one? That's going to be your spinal nucleus or trigeminal. Okay, so it's a kidney bean shaped nucleus. And then thinking about, we have cranial nerve number 6, abducens nucleus, cranial nerve number 7, facial nucleus. Moving laterally, next one in order is cranial nerve number 8, my little kite. Alright, so the kite's going to be my vestibular nucleus. And closely associated with the vestibular nucleus, the little circle just above it, that's going to be my cochlear nucleus. Vestibular nucleus receives information from the vestibular system. Cochlear nucleus receives information from the cochlea. Okay, a new one we just talked about today for the first time that we'll talk more about later. It's going to be present again medially. Doesn't change much. This is going to be your MLF, or your medial longitudinal fasciculus. And the other one we just talked about today, and we'll talk about later on, present here, usually travels around with the STT. This is going to be your sympathetic tract. Main portion of the connector from the pons to the cerebellum is going to be present most dorsally. It's going to be present bilaterally is here. This is going to be your inferior cerebellar peduncle, and draw it bilaterally. Okay, that's your inferior cerebellar peduncle. Another large connector to the cerebellum is going to be here. Present bilaterally. This main connector is going to be your middle cerebellar peduncle. There's only one more that we haven't talked about yet, and that's it looks like a circle here in this cross section, because what's happening is this conduit or connection to the cerebellum is really traveling up and down. So when you do the cross section, you only see a circle. Okay, and this is going to be the last of the peduncles. This is going to be your superior cerebellar peduncle. Okay. That's it for the pons. All the things that we said we'd see. Nuclei, efferent, afferent tracts, peduncles, ventricular system, all pieces. Questions about the pons? And I saved the easiest one for last. The easiest one is going to be your rostral midbrain. There it is, rostral midbrain. Nuclei and tracts. my favorite portion of the ventricular system. It's right here. Okay, that's your cerebral aqueduct. Nice landmark. Okay. So this is going to be, again, dorsal, and here's ventral. Present most ventrally. Huge amount of stuff coming down. Okay. This huge amount of stuff represents the combination of both the corticospinal and the corticobulbar tracts. Okay, so you have all those motor cranial nerve axons and all those total body motor axons coming down, traveling through this space. Okay, this space is called your cerebral peduncle, and it is nothing more than a combination of CST plus corticobulbar axons. Okay. We have this guy here. He's still medial. He's an elongated shape. And that's your medial lemniscus. That cranial nerve that's responsible for the majority of extraocular eye movements, plus levator palpebrae. This guy here, which nucleus is that? Oculomotor. So this exiting ventrally is going to be cranial nerve number 3, and this is going to be your oculomotor nucleus. Remember, at the level of the midbrain, we still have that STT tract coming up, making its way up to the thalamus, and that STT is going to be here. Okay, so STT present bilaterally here. Traveling around with the STT, somebody we haven't talked about yet, but will. It's going to be your sympathetic tract. Again, somebody we haven't talked about yet, but will when we get to the vestibular. Also very medial. This is going to be your medial longitudinal fasciculus. Your MLF. another good marker for the midbrain. One more thing we talked about kind of throughout the semester. I think midbrain, this is going to be your red nucleus. That's it. We be done. I know, a lot. All stuff, some new stuff with the cranial nerves thrown in there, but for the most part, these are things that you would expect to be there, right? That's just 3 different